Hello, innovators. I am Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today we're talking with Johnny Roccia, the Director of Career Services and Career Specialist at Ama La Vida. Actually, the second guest from Ama La Vida, as it turns out, on the show. Career coach, founder of the Opportunity Machine, and he is a solver of problems. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath PolyCast.
Thank you for having me, and what a wonderful intro. I need that sound clip for later.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to cut it for you.
Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator.
It's one of those things too where if I run out of air when I'm doing the intros, it always makes me a little bit happy because that's kind of the whole point, doing many different things.
Having a long-winded intro. Long-winded in the truest sense.
Yes. The way I like to break the ice is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
That is difficult because I'm such an incredibly public person. I will broadcast absolutely everything I do, even tremendous mistakes and utterly incorrect opinions. I am happy to broadcast out to the world. So something that nobody knows about me already, at least in the public sphere, I used to be a stable hand. And that might actually be buried somewhere in a blog post, but I used to live in a horse barn. There were 6 stalls on one side, 5 stalls on the other side, and me. And I lived in the barn, and I woke up with the horses, and I mucked stables. And most people who have met me, not only because I sort of live in this very white-collar world now, but also because it's hard to envision me just in that physical space. It's hard to envision me having done that sort of thing. And I'm not a passionate horse lover or anything like that. People that do those things tend to be doing it because they really, really like horses or they really care about that industry. And for me, it was one more of a long series of why not decisions that I've made throughout my life.
I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of those why not decisions as well. And after looking through your blog, I don't think I remember seeing that on there, but I could believe that it's on that considering just how many posts you have. So the first question here is, what was mindset 5 years ago and how have you changed since then? How many whys have you changed?
5 years ago was a pretty pivotal moment in my life, actually, because about 5 years ago, I was in the middle of working with a tremendous organization that we offline briefly spoke about a little bit, an organization called Praxis, which was a boot camp of sorts for young professionals, primarily college opt-outs, though it was not exclusive to college opt-outs, but that was primarily the demographic, who wanted an earlier start on their career. So some of our people were 16 years old, 15 years old even, I think. Yeah. Upper cap usually being around 22, 23, and envisioning someone who was 22 being thought of as old in that context. And it was people that really wanted to break into career spaces that can often feel like they're very exclusionary for people that didn't follow a very specific academic path. And I had done that. I would have loved to have had Praxis in my life at that age because I had done that in the hacking through the jungle way. And I really loved the idea of helping people. And I was sitting there staring at the love of what I did, but also the realities of my role in that career space and how it interacted with my life space. And I was forming more and more of the context around what career and life meant as a mix. Up until that point, I had very slavishly dedicated myself to career first. Even as a father, I thought, well, my role as a father is to provide. My role as a father is to be successful, and therefore, all of the other things that make someone a good father flow from that. I was still a newer father. My son was born in 2018, so depending on when in 2018 we're talking, we don't know whether I only had 2 kids or I'd had my 3rd yet, but all of my kids were young. And I still was just and so my middle child was only a baby, my oldest was 5, and I'm thinking, that's what a father does, right? A father has to push and push and push and push and dedicate everything to career, not necessarily to money. I had made several career choices by then that prioritized purpose over money, but they'd still all focused on purpose of career. And then I was really just staring down the barrel of those 2 sections of my life, those 2 continental shelves drifting further and further apart, realizing that if I didn't work to integrate these, I was going to be basically successful in my career and mailing that success to my family in a way that did not put me adjacent to them. So there was a big shift there. And over the last 5 years, that's been the biggest shift in my motivations, in my perceptions, has all been towards bringing it back from that center pillar of the family and doing career things. I'm still always very a career-driven person, but now that alignment is so much more important.
Well, and while the work and family aspects, I think, are a lot more pivotal to our life rather than just this show's about being multidisciplinary, have a lot of different skills. And what you said, I think, applies to that quite a bit too, like changing your alignment and being wary of focusing too much on one pillar. But I think for you in particular, that deepness, that the rawness of having a family and the job focuses, and you were so focused on the job, but then you had to change that dichotomy to be more synergetic. I think that's very interesting, very powerful too. It's even more prudent than changing skills and occupations, you know?
If you want true multidisciplinary expansiveness, set of kids who do not share your interests will absolutely do it, because there's some overlap. But you have to be, if you want to be involved and present and aware of your children's lives, especially if you have more than one child, you have to just be willing to dive in on everything. You have to be willing to engage on everything. You have to be willing to share a level of ignorance that is a beneficial ignorance. My 6-year-old, my middle child, she's 6, she was 5 when the story happened. We were talking about dinosaurs. She loves dinosaurs. She's my little paleontologist. And I mentioned something offhand, I don't even remember the context, but about dinosaurs being cold-blooded. And she says, "No, Daddy, dinosaurs were warm-blooded." And I went, "No, honey, they're cold-blooded. They were reptiles, they're cold-blooded." And she almost started hyperventilating. And I said, "I'll tell you what, let's look it up together. Let's research it together. Don't you know they're warm-blooded? The current consensus among scientists is that dinosaurs are warm-blooded." And so I read that. I said, "Oh, it looks like that." And I explained the, changing scientific consensus, and I explained what I thought when I was a kid, and that got us on the subject of Pluto and everything else. Mm-hmm. And she breathed this sigh of relief, and she goes, "Oh, thank goodness, I was not looking forward to that." This idea that I was going to challenge her on a fact that she knew. So, yeah. But that's a world that, independent of having a daughter that is so incredibly into dinosaurs, I probably know a lot about dinosaurs now and would not under normal circumstances. So it is a true multidisciplinary impetus that having kids gives you, especially curious-minded kids like they are.
Well, and I think family in general too. If you have a very close family member, like my uncle growing up was probably closer in age to like a brother rather than an uncle, and so like a lot of his interests spawned onto me too, that kind of thing. But I guess kids, especially since it's such a close relationship, it's even more so. Actually, going back on that Praxis, early on in my personal branding journey, I came across Praxis, and I remember going on there multiple times, talking with people on staff through the chats, and that's why I thought maybe I talked to you back then too. I even used Crash.co, which is the spinoff that you made. Yeah. What was your experience with Praxis? Like, what was that kind of dynamic of having all these youngins come in? And like you said, you didn't get to have the opportunity, but you were able to help them with theirs at least.
You struck me as such a Praxis person when we first started talking that I even looked. I went through your background. I thought he must have been at Praxis. Just he has the vibe. He must, and you weren't. I thought, oh, maybe I'm just wrong. He just would have fit in there. So now knowing that you had engaged with it at least some degree, I thought, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. It was a big change in my own environment. Prior to that, I had spent the majority of my career trying to be older. I'd been in a lot of careers and a lot of industries where I was the youngest person on the team, or I was the least senior person, and was doing all of these things to try to make myself seem older. I would never go by Johnny back then. Even though that's my name, I would never go by that, because then you get Johnny Boy and the Kid and things like that. Then suddenly, in a big shift, I'm at Praxis, and I wasn't the oldest person there, and I won't blow up his spot by saying who the oldest was, but I was the second oldest person there. I was older than the CEO, and I was older than the average employee by about 20 years. And it was a wild shift, and I was respected for it. My experience was respected, so I loved that environment. I never felt like an outsider, but it was a change to suddenly be the old guru as opposed to the young guy scrapping for his spot. I encountered Isaac before I knew what Praxis was. Isaac was very public. He'd done a lot of speaking engagements. Isaac Morehouse, the CEO, for anybody that I don't want to use context other people don't have. And he was wonderful, and he was so passionate, and he was speaking my language. He was talking about forging these alternate paths, and he was talking about building a better signal, a reference to a book by economist Brian Kaplan, who also is a friend of mine, and who had wrote The Case Against Education, which was about the signaling model of education. And Isaac had been inspired by that idea, and that was part of what created Praxis. So I loved everything that he was saying, and I wrote him basically fan mail. And at the time, I was a sales trainer, and I said, I'm a sales trainer. I forged my own path. I didn't go to college. I would love to do either a sales training for your staff or a sales webinar, seminar for your students. I know that sales is a path that a lot of Praxis graduates may be attending. I would love to. He wrote me back immediately. That's great. Wow, let's talk. Let's get online. Let's have a great conversation. And we did, and we launched the webinar, and it was very well attended and very well received, and he liked it, everybody else liked it. So I thought, here's my in. Great. I'm going to use some leverage on this. So I wrote him an email and said, he was in Charlotte at the time, and I said, I'm going to be in, or maybe Charleston. I always mix those two up. Charleston, I think. And I said, I'm going to be in Charleston next week. Let's grab lunch. Let's grab a beer. And he says, sure, let's do it. How's Thursday? I said, great. I was absolutely not going to be in Charleston. I sent that email. That was a total lie. I sent that email. I live in New Jersey. I sent that email after he said, yes, Thursday afternoon. I just drove 11 hours for that meeting. I just got in my car and drove Wednesday night, slept in the car on the road, rode the rest of the way, made that beer. And we're having lunch. We're just having a great conversation. And I had queued this up. I knew at some point he was going to ask, so why are you in town? You know, what brings you to Charleston? I said, this beer, man. And then told him the whole story. And from there, we then ended up building a path and working together. So I made it into Praxis. The people were incredible. The program was incredible. I really do love everything about my time there. The ending of it just didn't, like I said, that continental divide was starting to happen. I had a baby boy, and we were talking about moving. We were talking about uprooting everybody from New Jersey all the way down. Lo and behold, 2 years later, that all would have gone away anyway since the office, everybody came remote. But ultimately, just that's not the decision it went. But my time there was so incredible and led to so many other wonderful things too, because one of my graduates at Praxis became the first employee of Ama La Vida, where I am now. And I had helped place her there, and I had a great relationship with the founders of Ama La Vida because of that. They were a hiring partner when I was at Praxis. And then when I had left Praxis, right at that same timing, my former student had told their bosses, the founders of Ama La Vida, oh, we need a career development specialist. We need someone to build a career program. I've got somebody for you. My career teacher at Praxis, he's fantastic. And it was a very short interview. I talked to Forum, who's one of the co-founders. She's my boss now. She's also absolutely incredible. And the interview was, who's your favorite employee? And she says, oh, Randallin. And I said, well, I trained her. And she says, oh, then you're hired. And that's how I came to Ama La Vida. So you really can build relationships more than, to circle this back to the theme here, more than just specific skill sets. I think people too often try to board the train of a skill set instead of boarding the train of relationships. And when you board a train of a skill set, you are building so many boxes and brick walls around yourself. You are forcing yourself to constantly cold call new relationships into your life. You are forcing yourself to follow a track that has no stops and no changes, and it can be the wrong one, and you have no way of really knowing that quickly. Whereas the track of relationships will lead its way through many different skills. Because I joke, I've said this on other webinars, that if Forum called me up today and said, hey, we're getting out of the coaching business. We're going to go start a toothpick factory. Do you want to come be our business development manager? I would say yes in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. Because the relationship is there, and skills can be developed. But relationships like that are difficult to forge.
So many jumping points from there. One thing I should mention too is that part of the reason why I was into Praxis is that I was looking for my own self-education endeavor, and I created my own do-it-yourself degree, the modular degree. And around the time that I saw Praxis, I was about a year into my personal branding, year and a half, I guess. So I was already creating more content than was already on the trajectory of the graduate program there. And so I was like, I'm already kind of doing most of the stuff that Praxis would do, and I'm meeting people. Like I just kind of hacked into it and found all the people that were there and just tried to like talk to a lot of graduates and talk to a lot of people who were there. I wish I still taken it, or at the very least tried, but I definitely knew, like what you're saying there, that relationship you can build up. I met people through Praxis and through Crash.co too, eventually as well. And so maybe Kaplan might actually be someone that I should talk to down the line too, because self-directed learning and the self-directed podcast they have is really good as well.
You should talk to anybody ever. My experience with Brian is very interesting because, of course, he's a professor. He is a multiple times over published author. He's a blogger as well. Now it's a Substack. He doesn't blog, he does it on Substack. But he's also just a very interesting guy. And he was so incredibly willing to engage with people completely out of his bubble. He and I had almost nothing in common. We were introduced by a mutual friend when we were all working on openborders.info together. So I used to write for openborders.info, which was a pro-immigration immigrant information site. And Brian was one of its advocates. He wrote sparingly for it, and we were introduced by a mutual. We just ended up talking about that. But then we've talked about so many other things. I went to his house once. He would host conventions at his house in Virginia often, and one of them was a convention on either some political topic or an education topic, something like that. And after speaking to the crowd of people for a little bit, of course, he's given a talk. As soon as the talk was over, he just leaned over to me, and almost everyone in this crowd was his either students or academic peers or things like that. And after giving the talk, he leans over to me and he goes, "Hey, do you want to go shoot pool?" And we just went upstairs, and he has a pool table, and we just shot pool for a while. So that willingness to engage with people far outside your bubble is itself such a tremendous trait. And he's so very welcoming of that, and such a genuinely nice guy. And he has a ton of extremely contentious opinions. Extremely. He's an iconoclast. He has enormous number of very unusual opinions, all of which are very well thought out, all of which are very well defended, and all of which he will speak to you so kindly about, no matter your level of disagreement, no matter your level of just absolute disgust at the position that he is espousing. He will smother you with kindness, and it's genuine. It's not, he doesn't have a duplicitous bone in his body. I've played party games that involve bluffing with him at events at his house. He does not have a duplicitous bone in his body, but he will engage with you on those kind of topics. And that is another trait that is important to someone that wants to be multidisciplinary, is the ability to be kind in all sectors. Because if you cannot be kind in every direction, 360 degrees from yourself, you are naturally going to cut off certain avenues of progress for yourself, and you're often going to cut them out without you knowing you've done so. Because if you're a jerk, even if you're a jerk so narrowly, if you're a jerk to 1% of the population, you don't know where that infection starts. You don't know what person you've been a jerk to tells some other person. And the person that has the best possible future opportunity for you, that doesn't give it to you or share it with you because they don't like you, they don't also tell you that. So you never get to see the error. The person that could have been your next wonderful employer, partner, investor, that reads something of yours publicly where you've been unkind and doesn't engage, they don't send you an email and go, "Hey, Dustin, I just want you to know I would have been your number one star. I have $1 million check ready to go to invest in you, but you were a jerk, so I don't write it." So you never even get to know that that happened. So it's very important in terms of, let's call it social insurance for yourself, that you don't have to be sycophantic. You don't have to bend yourself into these gelatinous positions where you never have an opinion of your own and you never voice anything for fear that it might offend somebody. Don't do that. But be kind in all aspects, be engaging. And if you do that, so many skills will just drop at your feet.
The opportunity cost of being a jerk.
Enormous. Enormous, the opportunity cost of being a jerk.
What does opportunity mean to you?
Opportunity is open doors and the choice which one to go through. We close doors left and right. It is humans' favorite activity, is to just close doors for ourselves. For others too, but for ourselves more than anything. We put ourselves into positions where there's only one door to go through, or there's only two and we're just choosing the worst of two bad doors. We do that all the time. We wait until the very last minute to make very important decisions, so that we've now forced ourselves into high stress, high risk situations where we must choose badly and we do not get to rely on the full faculties. We don't pay attention. We don't lift our head up and look around at opportunities. Us talking. You posted on LinkedIn. You had posted, and we'd been connected for some time, but you posted a sort of general call. And that's the sort of thing where the passive response was for me to scroll past it.
Yeah.
I wasn't on a specific hunt for podcast appearances, but I knew you had been interested. You posted interesting things. And so when you said yes, choosing the active choice, because I don't need it, I just want as many doors open as possible all the time. And any interaction with a new person is a door. Any new thing you haven't done before is a door. Mm-hmm. New avenues of communication is a door. Opportunity means creating as many doors as you can, even if you don't know that you're going to walk through them, even if you know you won't. You can only walk through so many, and life being one directional, most doors you go through, right, you can't come back. Some you can, and we make that mistake too, but every door you go through is meaning there's some others that you don't go through. That's fine. But I want to make that choice. I don't want to be in a situation where I say, I want to leave this room and there's only one door out, so I have to go through that one. I have to leave through exactly that door. And I don't want other people to be in that situation either. And that applies to so many different avenues. Obviously in my work, this is a career thing that we talk about a lot, of people waiting until they're laid off to even think actively about their career. And they've been somewhere for 15 years, and in 15 years they just never pulled their head up out of the sand, they never looked around, they never did anything, and now they're scrambling because they need something on a very short notice. They haven't built up the right insulation socially, financially, in skills, anything, so they're choosing between a very limited set of very bad options. I don't want that for other people, I don't want that for me. So that's opportunity. Opportunity is choice, it's freedom, it's taking the room that I'm in now and making sure it's got 100 doors leading off of it, even if I like the room I'm in now. Because there's this recognition that you won't always. Mm-hmm. That you're sort of on a slow but moving treadmill moving backwards. And it might only be moving at a half a mile an hour. And so you can easily, with a little effort, overcome that inertia, that momentum, and move forward. But if you just hold still, you're never really holding still. You're drifting ever so slowly backwards.
Yeah. So, no, progress or regress is something I find very fascinating. I always kind of see it like an hourglass where you have progress going up and regress going down, and you're always moving forward or back, right? Like you never stay in the same spot. And something I had to teach with a lot of my clients over the years in the pool was that in order to maintain where you are, you have to get 1% better, basically. That was kind of like the simplicity of it. And while there's some nuance to that, it is kind of true. Like you just have to keep making a little bit more step forward if you want to try to stay where you're at. You can't just like do the same thing and expect the same results. If you do the same thing over and over again, you're going to start regressing. And some people just had, regardless of age, but usually it was the older crowd that had issues with, they had a hard time just fathoming that. Like they thought, like, I just want to do the same thing so I can keep doing the same movements outside of the pool and stuff like that.
So
it's
many.
Like, no, you're going to regress.
So many of my clients, they're in that exact spot. They've carved a nice rut. We want to believe that the world will not change. But the world will change, you will change. There are things that made me very happy 15 years ago. When I was no children, I would travel a lot. I would travel a lot for work. I'd be staying in hotels 6 nights out of 7, company paying the tab, steak dinners with clients. That now sounds like a nightmare. But nothing about it changed. I changed. And we have to not only acknowledge that the world is moving, but we have to acknowledge that the things I want now, I'm not going to always want. My kids are now in that young, amazingly curious, exploratory phase. In 15 more years, my kids will all be relatively adults, teenagers and adults. I'm not going to want the exact same structure in my life as I do now. So we have to acknowledge that nothing is permanent. We can maintain threads of values. We can maintain certain core philosophical conceits in our life. But we cannot say, oh great, I figured out the way to swing a hammer. All I have to do now is repeat that motion for the rest of my life and everything will work out fine.
The next thing you have to do is learn how to use a screwdriver. Given all the twists and turns of your life, what areas do you think you encompass across the board?
A relentless level of curiosity is so important. My clients are not all from one industry. Most of my clients do not share an industry with me. And often you'll have clients that have never engaged with coaching before and they think that it has to be. So if they're in the medical field, they want to coach this in the medical field. And after engaging, they realize, oh, it has nothing to do with that, does it? And I think of it like the weave of a tapestry, where the vertical strands are the skills that you can have, knowing how to do this, knowing how to do that. And the horizontal strings are the approaches, the curiosity, the personal relationships that ties those things together. Your journey has far more to do with those horizontal strings, because there are skills that I've practiced in the past that I was very good at, that I've never practiced again. There were things that I did that I loved I never did again, but there are approaches that have stayed constant throughout. A proud ignorance, and I don't mean proud ignorance in the sense that I'm proud of staying ignorant, but that acknowledgement that it's great that I don't know things. It's great that I don't know everything. Because as soon as you start to think you know things, you start to abandon some curiosity, you start to get a little hubris, you start to think, I'm on the other side of the divide between expert and non-expert. And the reality is that the most prominent expert in the world in any given field knows a drop in the ocean about that thing. Everyone else might only know half a drop, but that person still is not over the 50% mark of knowing all there is to know about that field. So going into this with a totally egoless curiosity and saying it's totally fine that I don't know things, having joy at learning things. There's a webcomic called XKCD. I don't know if you ever read it, but there's a issue of this webcomic called 10,000, and it's about somebody saying, oh, what's the Mentos and Diet Coke thing? And somebody else making fun of them, being like, you don't know the Mentos and Diet Coke thing? Everybody knows that. And then the author of the webcomic does this math and says, if you look at population growth over time, and he sketches out this math, for every fact that, quote unquote, everyone knows by the time they're 30, given birth rates, et cetera, 10,000 people per day have to learn that thing. So instead of the next time someone says that they don't know something that you think everyone should know, don't make fun of them. Don't push them back. Go, hey, you're one of today's lucky 10,000, and I get to be there for it. I get to be a part of this with you. And that, I've printed that out and had stuck that on various things in my life and in my car, because that's such a joyous way of looking at the world and recognizing that curiosity and learning and the ability to put aside the bricks of ego that over the course of our lives we build and build and build. Because the older you get, the more advanced you get, the harder it is to spend the social capital to say to your other advanced peers, I have no idea what that is. We instead all have to make up some BS answer about what we know about it. But we don't. It's fine to just say, no, I have never heard of that before. Tell me more about that. I'm so intrigued. That is a thread that weaves through all of those things. So when I engage with a client that's in not only an industry I've never worked in, but an industry I've never heard of, I can dive in so deeply with them. And at the end of one session, they will tell me, I've worked in this industry for 15 years and you've asked me questions nobody has ever asked me. You've uncovered stones that nobody's ever even thought to uncover, and it's already yielded all of these insights about what my next steps are going to be, because I wasn't afraid of showing somebody that I didn't know anything. I wasn't afraid of thinking, well, this client, if I don't fake that I know something, this client's going to think that I'm an idiot, they're not going to want me to work with them. It's the total opposite. They say, now that I see this relentless curiosity, I know that I can have it too, and that this is a safe space for me to express that, and you won't judge me because you were willing to open up on your side. Now we get such incredible work done. So that, removing that wall that people tend to build for themselves is a key thread running through. You can learn anything with that.
It's the type of philosophy I try to have in this show as well. And kind of what you're talking about too is inducing that empathy. Like, if they don't know, then share what you know with them and teach it to them, or at the very least show them how to learn it. And on this show, the first question I ask is, like, share something about yourself that no one knows about you, because it's a weird question, it's a surprise question. I don't send that ahead of time. I do that in order to kind of break the ice and allow you to, if you can answer that question, all the other ones are going to be easy after that. And then one skill I had to learn as a host was to active listen. I'm such a talkative person that it's really hard for me to just shut up and listen. but it's a skill that I've worked on. And every single interview I do, I have to remind myself, hey, no, don't talk. Let them finish. Maybe they're going to go for longer than you expect. That's okay. Open your mind, empty your cup, and listen.
Same on the coaching side. I'm a chatty Cathy, so picking that up during sessions this is something that I felt this format actually helps with. When it's gotten better in the last couple of years, but video communication didn't used to be this good. And there used to be enough of a delay that you almost had to wait for the pause just to make sure they'd cleared the 2-second gap that's going to come in communication. So in many ways, this has helped with that.
Well, and even today, like during this interview, about 5 minutes ago, you froze for like a millisecond or a second. And I was like, oh, and then, but you continued to speak. And so I just had to wait patiently, like you just said, yeah. Something I ask all of my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
I thought about, you said this question ahead of time, and this was something that made my shower longer today as I was just thinking about this. Because there's the standard definition of just someone who knows a lot of things, someone who practices a lot of skills. But I don't think, even though I don't think that's an incorrect definition, I don't think that's a helpful definition. I think a helpful definition is that it's someone who doesn't put themselves in a box around one skill. Someone who says, I am a plumber. Now that person, every single person has some multidisciplinary talents. There's no person in the world that only knows how to do one thing. But that person has put themselves in a box. They say, I am a plumber. And now that starts to become this excuse not to engage with other things. Hey, do you want to learn how to code with me? I'm taking this coding boot camp for a week this summer. Do you want to do it with me? Oh, I can't do that. I'm just a plumber. This way that they do it for themselves. When of course that's not true. Of course, the single skill you're practicing right now does not have to be an identity label that constrains all other choices, and it does not have to define you in other ways. Even labels that aren't skill-based, somebody saying, I'm a vegetarian. It's fine if that's the particular value system you want to put out, but be careful of tattooing labels on yourself. I didn't eat any meat today. Not because of a philosophical choice, I just haven't eaten any meat today. Am I a vegetarian today? If somebody decides that the moral question of meat consumption is important to them, and so they reduce their consumption. They say, I'm going to do that Meatless Monday thing. Mm-hmm. And then Meatless Mondays becomes meatless every day but Sunday. Are they a vegetarian? Are they in that label? Are they in that tribe? It's a definitional thing. So when we put boxes around ourselves, especially when it comes to things we can do, then that becomes a trap. It starts to affect our way of thinking. We start to eliminate awareness of the other things we do. One of my clients had been 22 years in real estate. She was a real estate agent. She put herself tightly in that box. She wanted to go into marketing. She wanted a role where she wasn't an individual solopreneur anymore. She wanted to work with a company. She really liked the idea of marketing, but she had built so many walls. Every single session was filled with her saying, I can't do this because I'm a real estate agent. I can't do that. Her saying, I don't know anything about marketing. And I would ask her, how did people find out about the houses you were selling? And she said, oh, I would do paid advertising on Facebook, and I would do a direct mailer campaign. I would do this and this. And I say, that's marketing. She goes, no, I'm a real estate agent. Right? And so that, I think, is the mindset around being a polymath. It's around removing the idea that a skill is definitional. Skills are just tools in a toolbox. Even if you practice one of them consistently and it's the majority of your time for a long time, it's still tools in a toolbox. And you're still the one that gets to define yourself based not on which tool you use, but based on the outcomes you're trying to achieve in the world, in your life. And if you focus more strongly on that aspect, you will recognize that not only are you better at more things than you think you are, but that you have the capacity to expand that even further than what you already do. So many clients have this idea that, they'll come to me and say, I want to do a career change. Okay, great. That's what I'm here for. I love it. And they'll say, how do I take the things I've already done and extract the elements that are relevant to the new career pivot? So that's a great start. But what we should also do is look at what that new industry in that field needs and see what skills you can gain. And when I'm talking to almost anyone over 30, they're shocked at that idea. This idea that I could learn a new skill, or even fear or trepidation, this idea, I don't want to learn a new skill, but of course they do want to learn a new skill, but they don't think they can, and that's turned into indignance. So by removing that constraint around yourself, anyone can do this. Humans are just astronomically good learners until we invent social reasons not to be.
Yeah. That social construct to tell us not to. And it's interesting too because all these boxes that you self-impose, or even sometimes society imposes on you, and some people adopt those, despite the fact that we're encouraged to think outside the box, ironically. But like you said, skills are not boxes. There's a toolkit. You actually have a great post on boxes, and I have that link down below too for people who want to check that out.
Oh, thank you very much.
Pivoting is something a lot of generalists and polymaths do. And so what do you think is the best course for someone multidisciplinary to pivot their career?
Well, I obviously love what I do, and it's a great way. Generalists have a challenge when it comes to career exploration. If you are already on the side of the philosophy that say you are, where you identify as a polymath, you're proud of being a polymath, you love that you are a generalist, the challenge that can come on that side of the scale is it can be difficult to communicate your value to a specific other person. Mm-hmm. Because you have many, many pieces of value, but for any given interpersonal relationship, that very first step generally has to be built on one core value proposition, one idea of what I can provide for you. I use the plumber analogy when I'm talking about people wanting to advertise their services or advance their career. Imagine two plumbers, and they both take out ads in I used to joke of the phone book, but now I'm realizing no one knows what a phone book is. They take out ads online, and one of the ads says, I am a plumber that can do anything. Any plumbing concern at all, I can do any of it. The other person says, I fix garbage disposals. Is your garbage disposal not working? I fix it. I'm the best, I'm the cheapest. The first person, even though they think, well, I have a very wide market base, I have that, they get no customers. Nobody calls that person because no individual potential customer has the problem of everything. They have a specific problem and they're looking for a specific solution at that time. So the person who says, I fix garbage disposals, they might know. They might be the Dustin Miller of plumbers and know I can do anything. But I've advertised this service because that will make the phone ring. People will call and say, my garbage disposal doesn't work. Can you come fix it? I say yes. Now we're talking. Now I do a good job with that garbage disposal. And then I say, by the way, this is also leaking and you could get better water pressure if you did this. And this new shower configuration would do this. And now you're trusted. You've built a relationship. You've done a good job. So they're ready to hear that. They weren't ready to hear it when they didn't know you. And that's why you can't advertise, I do everything. People tend to perceive I do everything as you can't do anything, you're unfocused, whereas they perceive a very specific value add as meaningful. And when you're in that position of deciding what to advertise, it's painful. Because you have this idea that you're not advertising one thing, you're putting a bullet into 99 other things, and you'll never get to do them and you're abandoning them, and that's difficult for the generalist. But nothing's stopping you from putting up 99 more ads. Nothing's stopping you from broadcasting on different channels the different things you do and having them all lead back to you, especially in this wonderful, innovative digital age that we're in. But all relationships have to start with that one value add. So if you are and you can throw a dart at a dartboard to pick, by the way. If you, Dustin, were saying, here's all the things that I can do, how do I start a relationship with somebody? Throw a dart, pick one, use that to forge a relationship. From there, talk about everything else you can do. Because they'll all come back in if you want to. And this circles back to the comment I made earlier about building relationships. Because when you have a great relationship, you can do anything. I have a wonderful relationship with my boss, and over my time at Ama La Vida, I've done many different things. Not all of them are publicly visible, but internally, I've actually worn a large number of different hats. At Praxis, I wore a number of different hats. At Praxis, I both did the career training and I did business development, where I was reaching out to hiring partners and selling our services as Praxis. Because I had the relationship where I could say, hey, I want to do this. Here's also a thing I know how to do. It wasn't the thing you originally hired me for, but it's a thing I also know how to do, and I think it's valuable. And everyone engages with that because the relationship is good. You've built trust with the first thing you did. So as a generalist, look for environmental factors more than skill use. Look for, A, environments where there is a lot of chaos, and therefore there's a lot of opportunity to do different things. Don't get a job on an assembly line. you won't get as many opportunities. Look for a role where the industry itself changes a lot, where people change a lot. So coaching is a great example because obviously my clients come from all different walks of life, so it's good to be flexible. B2B sales roles are wonderful in this sense because you have so many different kinds of clients that are doing different things. Any sort of role where you are facing the public in some way, even being an architect, where you could be designing a shopping mall one day and a doctor's office the next day. Those expose you to different things and then therefore give you avenues towards different skill uses. Look for places where people also want to learn, because the more other people want to learn, the less it will be strange when you want to learn, and the more people you'll have on that journey with you. Look for a tribe that doesn't look at you like you have three heads when you say, I want to set aside 4 hours every week to just do stuff that's not in my job description. There are those environments, but we, again, constrain ourselves to say, I have to look for a plumbing job. And we're making our choices based on a skill instead of based on these other criteria of let me look for, like, I did not know what Praxis looked like internally when I discovered Isaac Morehouse. I wrote to Isaac Morehouse because I thought, that's a guy I want to know. That's a guy I want to talk to. And I had no concept of what Praxis looked like internally. I learned that through doing my initial pro bono sales webinar. I just wanted to engage because I thought that guy, there's something to him, and I can feel something there, and I want to know him. That's what you want. And it was the same reason I came on this podcast, right? I saw you post. I thought, that's a guy. I want to know that guy. He's got an interesting thing going on. I want that door open. I want that to be added to my collection of doors for the future. So engaging in that way is really true for anyone, but if you are a polymath, a generalist especially, adopt that mindset. Because then, as you find the people, they will also tell you what skills they need. So you have, just using you as the example, Dustin, you have 100 things you could do. But if you meet your just brilliant new potential partner in life, and they say, what I need is this, you go, oh, great, that's one of the 100 things. Absolutely, I can do that. And then from there, let's talk about this other thing. But you are allowing the needs of the world to help pull you towards a high-value situation for yourself.
And so touching on what you said too, like a lot of the guests I've had on the show have been those cases where I just, oh, that person's interesting, I'm going to reach out to them, and then eventually just got them on the show, like you came on today too. It's interesting too that you mentioned the idea of like where you're going to pull someone in. If someone is a generalist talking about, I can do everything, you need a niche down to get their attention, but you don't necessarily need a niche down for your actions. You could do what they ask, and then you spread out from there. You just have to delay gratification just ever so slightly. And the way I structured my content ecosystem is that umbrella meta niche of polymathy. But from there, I have the modular degree, the swimming, the content repurposing, all the different avenues where people are going to actually come in from the bottom up, that kind of thing.
It's one, you have to give, going back to the door analogy, you have to give people doors. People respond well to doors. They don't necessarily respond well to a big open field. If you give someone a blank piece of paper and say, think of the most creative thing you can think of, they will drool. They will just, with no rails around it, your creativity becomes like a gas. It just escapes. Mm-hmm. When you put some creativity around things, when you put incredibly narrow restrictions, and you say, I want you to invent a new household pet, a fictional creature that is a household pet on Mars, so it has to not breathe and it has to like the cold. And then suddenly people start sketching things and they're drawing little doodles and they're coming up with funny names. And all of that came from restricting down what you had to do. So then it becomes, again, still like a gas, but if you focus it down, it can be very high power, like those like water jets. So giving people a space to enter then explodes in the relationship. So having that, like I said, niche that opens up in other ways, that's the way to do it.
Well, and something that I talk about a lot is blogging. I've done it for a long time. It seems like you've done it for quite a long time too, seemingly every day since 2019. So how's that gone for you?
It is tremendously healthy. It's incredibly important. I have an awful memory, just truly terrible. And as we go through life, I think most people have a bad memory. I have a really bad memory. As we go through life, we encounter jewels all the time. important little lessons, pieces of meaning, ways to shape and refine our actions to our own betterment. And then they pass us by. They go in one ear, they go out the other. I like to capture. Capturing those, it's not just about writing, it's not just about refining that skill, though that's a nice side effect. It is about capturing these moments and making every day meaningful in some way. Every day is meaningful, but we so often lose it. If I pick an arbitrary date last year or 2 years ago, and I ask you, what was the meaning of that day for you? Mm-hmm. It might be very difficult to answer for a lot of people. They might say, well, what records have I even left? Maybe they posted something on social media that day. Maybe it showed up in their Facebook memories. Maybe not. And if it didn't, they go, well, then does that day just not count? Of course I learned something that day, but did I forget it immediately? That talk about regression, that in order to move forward, or in order to stand still, you have to learn 1% every day. You have to improve 1% every day just to stand still. Daily blogging is like improving 1% every day. It keeps me from backsliding. It keeps me from forgetting the things that have made my life meaningful up to this point, because they're so easy to forget. It's so easy to blink and 5 years go by. And while you lived it, it was meaningful. But did you take anything with you? Did you let those experiences shape yourself in the future? There's a little exercise I do every once in a while. I'll be driving and I will do something that is inconvenient to another driver for a very good reason, right? Oh, I'm carrying a crock pot of soup in my car, and so I'm trying to go to a barbecue. I've got a big crock pot of soup, so I'm going 10 miles an hour and I'm taking turns incredibly slowly, and that's maybe frustrating to other drivers, and somebody's honking at me. And instead of getting mad, I'm thinking, what does this look like to that other person? It looks like I'm an idiot. They don't know I have a crock pot full of soup. They think I'm just an idiot. So then, of course, I capture that in a way that I think most people don't. And the next time I'm driving and I see someone going 10 miles an hour, I just think, crock pot of soup. Careful with that crock pot, pal. You got it. I'll give you a wide berth. And I go, and I don't get mad. I don't get frustrated because that I captured it. We do human things and then get mad at other humans for doing those exact same things 10 minutes later because we didn't capture the experience. We didn't reflect on it and let it refine and grow us. Instead, we got into our rut, and just anything that pushed us even slightly out of that rut, we immediately reject and go back into our rut. So holding myself accountable in that way to saying I must not only learn something every day, but learn something meaningful, even if it's just something so minor, because of course many of them are very minor. If you ever were to go through my blog and read it in chronological order, many of those posts are minor. They are not all Emerson-level essays by any stretch of the imagination, but they are all things that day were lessons or observations or things that mattered, and it was good for me to go back and revisit them. And it was good for me, even just the act of writing them down, captured it and incorporated it in some way. And I think someday my children are going to have this record of their father's thoughts and experiences in a way that I would love to have from my own father. He shared so much with me verbally, but didn't write a lot. So I would love to have more of that. And I want my kids to have that. And I want them to someday with their kids say, oh, your pop-up did, let me show you this great thing he wrote. And that's where I feel like that's extremely valuable. And I don't necessarily think that every single person has to do it exactly that way, but I do think that every person could benefit from some advanced mindfulness of their day, recording something. There's those apps that let you record 1 second of every day and then they put into like a 4-minute video at the end. Those are cool. But anything that lets you keep those things from slipping through your fingers.
Memories on like Facebook and Instagram, for example. It's interesting too because while I didn't have enough time to read every single blog post you had, I did try to go through I tried to go through each of the months that you had listed out there, and I clicked them all new tabs. I went through each one and tried to see like the most interesting posts. And that's how I found the Boxes one. The Boxes one was from like 2019, I think. But it was one of the most interesting posts that I saw on there, at least in my particular point of view.
Wow.
And it's just one of those things where that's what I do when I have someone on a show. I try to incorporate as much as possible from them.
Now you see why it was so difficult to answer that question of what is something other people don't know about me, because it all comes pouring out. And some days there are days where you do less than other days, and some days that becomes very introspection. And there are days where I sit and it's 11 o'clock at night and I think, I really didn't do anything today. I didn't leave my house, so what am I going to write about? And then the only place to look is inward. And sometimes I get into some deep introspection. I try to maintain an extremely positive outlook there, but there have been posts that were dark. I mean, there have been posts where I've shared some dark things, and I think that's healthy too.
I had a post about the sadness of a happy man, and that was one that, like, I wrote in a dark place, but definitely needed to be put out there. And what's interesting too is that I have something similar. My blog, The Fireside Codex, is kind of like a sub-blog on my site where it's not formatted really in a particular way. It's literally just me going off with an idea. It's like a fireside chat, and it's a codex of entries, like a journal. And I think that's kind of the same style of blog that you have as well. So I definitely resonate with that.
Very good. Capture it. That's a good name too. The Fireside Codex. That's a great.
Yeah.
Oh.
So what do you hope to leave as an impression on the world in your life?
Oh no, I love this question. If there is some dream that in the future more than one person ever talks about the philosophy of Johnny Roccia, whether that's just my kids and they're telling their kids this is something Pop always said, or if it's in a wild dream some broader audience, I want people to take away that the vast majority of constrictions, rules, challenges are self-imposed and totally bullshit. Mm-hmm. That you can do absolutely anything, and almost every perception you have that you cannot is wrong. And I don't just mean that in the sense of, oh, if you try really hard, you can overcome those challenges. You're envisioning this hurdle and saying it's too much, but if you work really hard and diligently at it, you can overcome it. I mean a step further than that. I mean you're wrong about the challenge. I mean you are perceiving the hurdle incorrectly. All of these challenges, there are a few, very small few things you cannot do because the laws of physics do not allow it. And there are maybe another handful of things that you shouldn't do because the repercussions would be so terrible. But beyond those handful of things, you can do anything. And it's not that difficult to do. It's just that we impose difficulty. We allow certain constraints from psychology and evolutionary biology and society to impose beliefs that we then adopt and we make ironclad. Mm-hmm. But the walls are absolutely made of smoke. When viewed from without, those walls being made of smoke becomes more apparent. One of the reasons it's so important to build coalitions in your life and to build councils in your life is because the sharpest side of the illusion is the side that's facing you. Other people tend to have a slightly clearer view of the things you're imagining. Mm-hmm. There's a story I'm going to share about one of your former guests, since we now established that we know each other and work together. And now I feel like I might be rehashing stories because some of these stories are going to be in the blog. You might have already read this. But we work together in an office setting sometimes. And it was the very beginning of Ama La Vida. We had this very tiny shared office space with in kind of a co-working sort of space where there was a lot of people, different companies, in a shared kitchen. And my coworker, she had a mug that was her mug that she liked very much and she would drink coffee out of, and she would take to the kitchen. You have read that. I've seen you smiling, so you must have read this. And she would take it and put it in the kitchen and wash it and hang it up to dry. One day, someone else took the mug from another office, not from ours, took the mug. And not maliciously, they just didn't know it was hanging on the kitchen thing, and they thought maybe they were general use mugs. But it was all very open floor plan, so she could see where the mug was. Like she could see the desk where it was. And she said, oh, and she was sad to me. She said, oh, that person took my mug. And I went, oh, well, then just go get it. And she said, no, I can't do that. Right? This idea, I can't do that. And I started joking with her. I said, oh, you're right, you can't. Because if you go over there and ask her to give you that mug back, she'll scream at you. She'll accuse you of harassment and theft. She'll immediately call building security. They'll escort you out. She'll lie and say that you like struck her, maybe pulled a weapon. So you'll be escorted out of the building and arrested, which will be on the news. So you'll never work again, and you'll probably go to jail for a long time. And she said, she says, I don't think that's going to happen. I went, me either. Go get your mug. And that's what we do for ourselves all the time. We put up enormous walls because we let the fear voice in our mind make a claim, and then we accept that claim at face value and we don't make them back it up. We let the fear voice say, you can't start a podcast. And we never challenge that. We go, oh, well, the voice said I can't start a podcast, so I can't. And we don't ever challenge that voice and say, well, why not?
Right.
We just let it, oh, it's gospel. That voice said it. Or we let someone else say, I can't. One of my clients told me once he always wanted to start a bookstore. Always wanted to. That was we were exploring possible avenues. I always wanted to start a bookstore. I said, well, okay, great. And he said, you can't start a bookstore though. And I said, there's like 100,000 bookstores in America. I feel like somebody has figured it out. Anything anyone can do, you can do. And he says, well, I can't start a bookstore now. I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids. I don't make any money in a bookstore. I said, okay, now that's more valid, but let's explore that. Let's spend 10 minutes and just embrace this idea. Let's treat it as possible for 10 minutes and talk about the how. And we came up with a little business plan. We talked about real estate. We talked about inventory. We talked about business licenses. We talked about time split between a full-time role and that until he could transfer over, etc. And the outline that we came up with after 10 minutes was a 5-year plan. And at the end of that 5-year plan, he could be fully integrated into working full-time at a bookstore as his only job. I said, based on the outline we've done here, I thought that was very conservative. I think 5 years is way longer than it would actually take. But if he was comfortable with it, I said, do you think you could do this? He said, yes, with this plan, I actually feel very comfortable that I could do that. This is real, right? It's a real thing that could happen. And I said, okay, now how long have you been saying I always wanted to start a bookstore? And he got real sheepish, and he said, way more than 5 years. Right. Because you let some imaginary wall. And I said, does anything on here even look like it would be that hard? He goes, no, it would just take time, but nothing in this spot looks especially difficult. I said, right. Go into a independent small bookstore and meet the proprietors. Do they seem like they are under incredible amounts of stress and have just burdened themselves with an impossible Sisyphean task of rolling a boulder up a hill? No, they're just running a bookstore. It's not. We make these things more complicated than they are. So that's the legacy I want to leave behind in the world, is that you are invincible. You have superpowers. The world and all of its challenges are so much weaker than you as an individual. And if you let any part of that world tell you you can't do something, that is the only barrier in the world. It's not about hard work and dedication. It's about recognizing that you are just playing a game, and the game is actually much easier than you think it is.
Yeah. Well, shout out to Randolyn Hill. She's awesome.
She's
I think
the best.
Probably
I want to go on record and say so that when she listens to this, she hears me saying she's the best.
Well, and I linked to her episode too, so after you check out his websites and stuff like that, you can check her out. Speaking of that, where can people find you online?
Oh, everywhere. Well, the Opportunity Machine, which is where I blog, is at johnnyroccia.com, JOHNNYROCCIA. And if you go there, you don't have to go anywhere else because I am very diligent about backlinking, and everything else that I do is linked off of there. So from there, you can find my LinkedIn, and you can find my Ama La Vida coaching team page, and you can find my Twitter, and you can email me and all of those things. So, which is also, by the way, a lesson for everybody out there that is trying to do personal branding and is doing things like that. Always backlink. So when this episode is live, I'll have it in my page, my site for external links and things like that. So make sure if you're doing those things that it's easy for people to backtrace you.
Well, and just to touch on that real quick, one reason why I love having guests on the show too is that I like taking that holistic approach and checking out every single thing you have online, basically. And that's how I do my research. And so I try to put as many links as possible for guests on there. So like you said earlier, this is a door you wanted to do. Who knows? Maybe someone finds a link that they couldn't find elsewhere for some reason or another. They couldn't find the backlink. They find it through this video, and that's the pathway for you.
Amazing. And think about what you're doing, Dustin. This is so incredible as an opportunity machine, as a door opener. You are purposely putting yourself in this stream where you're meeting and engaging with people that in the natural organic course of life you may never have engaged with. You certainly would have engaged this deeply. I think people can maintain an awareness where I go into a restaurant, I sit down, the person at the next booth is interesting, and I talk to them. Most people don't do that, and they don't deepen that conversation. You are not only doing that, but you are, A, engaging really, really deeply with this wide variety of people, and B, you're creating something tangible to carry with you. You're not just doing, this wasn't just a conversation you and I had casually and then ships in the night and we never talk to each other again and there's no record of it. This being a meaningful thing that others can learn from, that future you can look back on and learn from, because in 2 years, your human frail memory will not hold this. You will not be able to recall this conversation and anything that might be interesting, but the record will exist. All of that is very powerful, and that, what you're doing is amazing and should be a great inspiration to anyone trying to create a backstop for them to keep themselves from sliding, is just fill that space with powerful lessons.
Thank you. And I guess that's a good call to action, actually, to do that or to check out your website or both. What would be a good call to growth for the audience to do?
Capture something. Take something you've done, something you've learned, something you're proud of, or even something you've experienced it, and capture it in some way. Take some pictures. They don't have to go public, though I encourage you to learn out loud. I encourage you to live out loud because it creates more connections. It makes you sticky to the world. But even if you don't do that yet, capture it in some way. Don't let that experience vanish. Capture it. Use the capturing to also think about it, to be introspective. If you take some pictures of an experience that you've had, ask yourself, why did I choose these pictures? Why didn't I take a picture of something else? Why did this strike me? Why did I choose this moment to capture? Use that to start learning about yourself. All these conversations with other people, they're wonderful, but you need to have a conversation with yourself too. You need to know yourself. You need to know what things are interesting and likable about yourself. And the easiest way to do that is to get you to know yourself better. So that's my call to action to everyone, is find something to capture, because you will start to look back and see the world is not as impossible as I have made it. Because look at all the things I have done. Look at all the things that might have seemed impossible before I did them. The world is much, much more of a playground than you think it is. And the best way to learn that is to start to play in it.
Wonderful. Well, once again, this is Dustin Miller and Johnny Roccia on the Polymath.
Thank you, Dustin. It was a pleasure.
Bonus content.
Bonus content is a story about the ultimate polymath who was my father. I am not a third of the diverse character that he was. My father truly did everything. He worked for Hewlett-Packard. He also drove an oil truck. He counted cards in a casino. He was been in jail. I mean, just all sorts of these wild things. And my father had methodology for figuring out which things were valuable and how to divide up time very efficiently. And there's this lesson he taught me that I now realize is a crucial lesson for anyone that wants to be multidisciplinary, but has to recognize that there are finite hours in the day and years in your life. I am 15 years old. My father tells me, we need to change the oil in your mother's car. Come on out. You're going to help me. Great. We go out to the garage. We take my mother's Dodge, whatever it was, drive it up onto the ramp. My father had his own ramps. He drove it up onto the ramps. We climb onto the car. We pull off the oil cap drain. We start draining the oil into this big pan. We're reaching under there, getting all filthy, pulling the filter out. Then after the oil's draining, we go up to the top. We pop the hood. And he shows me where the cap on the top is and how to read it and figure out what oil you need. We take the cap off. Then he says, all right, while it's draining, we're going to go to the auto store, take the cap with us so we can find the oil. We find the oil. We come back. Now we got to dispose of the old oil, and you can't just like throw it in the yard, right? So he says, here's how you got to jar it up and dispose it to get rid of it. And then we put the new filter in there, and then we put the cap on the bottom, and then we pour the oil, the new oil in at the top after making sure it's the right amount and the right kind. We put the cap back on. We back the car down off of the ramps, and he says, now you got to drive it around a couple blocks to like work the oil in. It took all afternoon. And when it was all done, and we're filthy and we're gross, and it's been all afternoon, it's done, and we pull the car back in the driveway, he says, all right, what did I teach you? And I stopped for a minute. And he said, "Yeah, you taught me how to change the oil in a car." He goes, "No, I taught you the value of $20 because for $20, somebody would have done that for you in 15 minutes. And you never would have had to do it again. I taught you this so you'll never do it again." Because my father believed that you needed to know how to do those things, but that it was not a point of pride to do everything yourself. It was a point of pride to be able to. It was a point of pride to talk intelligently about it. But my father understood opportunity cost very, very well. So he said, you can't do everything yourself. There are things that you do well so that you can give them to other people, so that other people do things well and give them to you. But he was aware of the trap that can be if you don't take the time to learn. So that balance, there's your bonus story. If you are a generalist, if you are a polymath, you need to understand economics, because you need to understand that that way of thinking can also lay traps for you if you aren't careful, just as a incredibly single-minded, single-disciplinary focus can make you trapped if you don't pay attention to the risks. So no matter what path you're in life, be aware of what traps are laid for you, take the steps to avoid them, to disarm those traps. You'll be very happy.
Value your time. We actually, just real quick, we talked about it off the camera too a little bit, the content management system thing, and how like WordPress and working with the cPanel and doing all that junk. I knew how to do it. It's good for me to learn how to do it. The waste of time of dealing with all that updating prevented me from creating content. Once I switch to something that pays a little bit more, costs a little bit more, it saved me a lot of time. It makes it way more better now. Kind of like going off what you're saying.
Critical lesson. Awesome.
Thank you.